Should the World Baseball Classic be held before or after the Major League Baseball season? Thanks to Blue Lightning Baseball for asking that question in last Friday's video. You're not the only one asking that question. It's been debated ever since the WBC first started 17 years ago. Actually, in the early days of the WBC, I think the majority of fans wanted it moved to after the season. At least that's the way it seemed to me. I could be wrong about that. Nowadays, I don't hear so many calls to have it in November. I think back then the biggest concern with holding the event during spring training was that players were going to get hurt, miss all or part of the season, and hurt the chances for a ball club that's paying them a lot of money. We've seen in the tournament's 5 editions that injuries aren't as common as so many people thought they were going to be. But there is a very vocal crowd that complains about players risking injury just before the season for what they call a meaningless exhibition. Would they be happier if the WBC was played in November instead of March? Probably not. I'm sure they'd still complain, but the timing of the event, right before the start of the long Major League season, is an issue. In the WBC last March, Jose Altuve was injured and had to miss the first 2 months of the season. Edwin Diaz got hurt during a post-game celebration, and he's out for the whole season. If those injuries had occurred in a November WBC, they could have used the off-season to recover. Altuve wouldn't have missed any time. Diaz would have missed some time, but not a whole season. Players have always known that injuries like these were a possibility, and that's made some players reluctant to participate. Not only that, some players change teams during the off-season. It's important for players to get used to practicing with their new teammates and learn how to work together before going out and playing a 162-game schedule together. It's especially important for pitchers and catchers. If they play in the WBC, they have very little time to practice with their new team before the regular season starts. If the WBC was in November, that wouldn't be an issue. They could play in the WBC, then take some time off, then they've still got all of spring training to get adjusted. When the possibility of moving the WBC to November was brought up after the 2009 edition, previous MLB Commissioner Bud Selig said that it wouldn't work. Players are too worn down after a 6-month season. And also, most players don't play in October. Their team doesn't make the postseason, so they would be asked to play in the WBC after having a whole month off, which would be really hard to do. I don't think he's exactly right about that. Players often perform at their best if they've got something to play for, even if it's late in the season, as we see in October for the postseason. And as for players who are finished at the end of September, there's a simple solution. Have them practice with the national team in October. As teams get eliminated from the postseason, the selected players join their national teams. I don't see how it would happen any other way. So, holding the WBC in November would give players time to recover from injuries. Changing teams during the off-season would no longer be a reason to sit out the WBC. More players would be willing to participate, right? Well, I'm not so sure about that. Bud Selig did make a good point about players being worn down. Physically, they're still capable of playing their best ball, but after 162 games, almost 200 if you include spring training, flying to different cities every week, and enduring the summer heat, it's a lot to ask for players to extend their season by a month, especially if they've been playing in the postseason, where the games are so important. They may be physically and mentally exhausted by the end of it all. They're looking forward to a little time off. And a November WBC, unlike the March WBC, would cut into the players' off-season. If they play in the WBC in March, they're not giving up any off-season time. If they weren't in the WBC, they'd be in spring training anyway. If they play in the WBC in November, their season becomes a month longer, and their off-season a month shorter. Nobody likes to give up vacation time. So as you can see, a March WBC and a November WBC both have their pros and cons. But what about the fans? After all, if they can get larger crowds and higher ratings, they'll find a way to get the players on board. How would the time of year affect fans' interest in the event? In the US, November and March are similar in that there are no championships going on, and the major professional sports haven't reached the playoffs yet. In March, the NFL is in its off-season. NBA and NHL are in the second half of the season, but it hasn't gotten really exciting yet. The only real competition the WBC has is from March Madness, and the WBC is over and done with before the Final Four, so the WBC can get the country's attention. In November, the NBA and NHL have just started. NFL is in the middle of its season, not playoff time yet, so seems like it might be a good time of year for the WBC. But competing with the NFL at mid-season is harder than competing with the NBA and NHL at their mid-season. Basketball and hockey seasons are quite long. Sports fans don't mind tuning out of those leagues for a while to watch the WBC. They can always catch the remainder of the season after the WBC, and they haven't really missed anything too important. It's different with the NFL because the season is so short, every game is important. It would be hard to get football fans to turn their attention to the WBC in the middle of the NFL season. And a November WBC would sort of be in competition with the World Series. The World Series is still the most popular baseball event in the US, and it would be a hard act to follow for a less popular baseball event like the WBC. One reason I think the WBC has been so successful is because there's really nothing going on in the month leading up to it. For American sports fans, the Super Bowl is done at the start of February. There won't be a major pro sports championship till summer, and they haven't seen baseball for a few months. They really miss it. And the WBC means they don't have to wait till opening day to see live competitive baseball. Even for those of us who watch baseball year-round, there's really not much going on that time of year. The Caribbean Series takes place the first week of February. Australian League finishes around the same time, so all winter baseball is done. The summer leagues, MLB, NPB, KBO, CPBL, LMB, all are in their off-season and don't get started till late March or April. Last February was pretty wild. Rosters were revealed early in the month. Everyone was talking about the WBC from then till when the event started a month later. Imagine trying to recreate that hype while the postseason is going on. It just wouldn't be the same. So at least for the US market, and Canada too, March is a better time for the event. As for Japan and Korea, the WBC is bigger than the Japan Series or Korean Series, so it wouldn't really matter. Soccer is the only other major team sport, and that runs at the same time as baseball. Taiwan, it wouldn't matter either. Anytime in the winter, the WBC will be a huge success in East Asia. Same for Latin America. The WBC will be a big hit there no matter what time of year it takes place. But there is one problem. All the Caribbean winter leagues start in October or November. They have their postseason in January so they can send their champion to the Caribbean Series at the start of February. Their seasons are already pretty short, with some of them playing just a 30-game schedule. They'd either have to play a really short season or continue the season without some of the best players who would be representing their countries in the WBC. I don't think this would turn Caribbean fans away from the WBC. They'd probably accept a disruption to their winter baseball routines once every 4 years. But if given a choice, they'd definitely prefer to have it in March, as a way to bridge the gap between the Caribbean Series and opening day for the summer leagues. So when it's all said and done, I'd say it's better off keeping the WBC in March. Not a perfect time for the event, but there is no perfect time. A November WBC might work, but you'd probably see less of a build-up to it because of the postseason going on, and I don't think it would result in more of the best talent participating. Might even have the opposite effect. There is a third option that gets brought up sometimes, extending the All-Star break and holding it in the middle of the Major League season. This idea also gets suggested as a possible way to keep baseball in the Olympics. The only way to do that would be to shorten the MLB season once every 4 years, or every 2 years if we're doing it for both the WBC and the Olympics. Japan and Korea took a long break for the Olympics 2 years ago, and it did work there. But they don't play as many games in NPB and KBO as they do in MLB, so it's easier to adjust the schedule without reducing the number of games played. And it's not such a big deal for them starting in March and playing late into November, because most of their cities don't get the amount of snow that northern US cities get, and a lot of northern US teams don't play under a roof. Also, as I said before, baseball in Japan and Korea doesn't have to worry about being overshadowed by any other professional league in November. MLB does have that problem. So, believe it or not, the best time of year for the WBC is March. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think down in the comments. That's all for this one, and until next time, this is Baseball International. See ya!